So the idea of the discussion is to have a kind of wrap up of the day. We touched upon so many interesting topics and highly discursive topics, so I think we will have a lot of questions to discuss here. We had issues as high-speed tracking in predictive judicial decisions, and translation, and pattern recognition, in autonomous driving cars, in surveillance issues. And the discussion here will be concerned with the question in how far artificial intelligence already touches upon our daily life. So we have here in the evening Professor Peter Weibel, who is our host today and an artist from ZKM. We have Professor David Berry from the Sussex Humanities Lab of the Center for Social and Political Thought, Dr. Robert Seyfert from the Institute of Sociology of the University of Duisburg-Essen, and Dr. Nikolaos Aletras from the University of Sheffield Information School. So maybe let's start with the question, where do you think is our daily life already influenced by artificial intelligence? Would you like to start, Professor Weibel?
The question was, if and where is our daily life influenced by artificial intelligence? Was this the question?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I would say the GPS system that was mentioned today in your lecture, the GPS system, no? The AV, so-called AV, is already excellent proof what we can discuss about artificial intelligence. First of all, we have to realize that we have an observation system, visual one, a satellite camera, which is superior to our natural organ. With our eyes, with our natural organ, we don't see very far, maybe some 100 meters. With this superior extra bodily interface, which is important, I call it interface, we can see much better, much far. Then this visual system is even turned as a code into in a language code, because suddenly the machine speaks to me and tells us something and says, turn right, turn left, whatever you do. So we have an expert system with an intelligence, a sensoric. So this expert system is sensory, more clever than me, it sees faster than me, and it can speak. So we have suddenly something which was 500 years ago not possible with Descartes, because Descartes made a division between res extensa, which is matter and body, extended things, and then res cogitans, thinking things, which is a subject and we. But suddenly I have objects which can speak to me, and they speak intelligent, because most people believe when the GPS says turn right, they turn right. Okay? That means, since already we trust, this is one example from hundreds, that we trust all the time already to the expertise of artificial intelligence, on which is on a very high level, because this system can speak, can observe, can process information, can give me information, and information which is intelligent. Now comes the point we can improve it, because at the moment, it only tells us you have a traffic stop, you have a rush or whatever. So it helps us to solve a problem. But the next point would be to help us not to help us to solve the problem, but to make a prediction, to make a predictive behavior. Tell us, if you don't start now, if you start 7 minutes later and take another route, there will be no traffic stop. So we can expand the intelligence even further, so that it helps us to predict problems and to avoid problems. This will be the next step. And then we find a step when somebody doesn't do what the AV wants, then the system can say, I stop the car.
Okay.
You have to follow my expertise.
Would you think it's a positive?
I think it's very positive, because people behave very irrational, completely irrational, and I think it can help us, expert systems, to behave more rational.
Okay, so we get more brain power for free, so to say, from artificial intelligence.
Yeah. We get more degrees of freedom, in fact. I have more options of decisions.
Professor Berry, what would you choose?
So we could say that we've had artificial intelligence for 150 years. We just call them corporations. In some senses, maybe we need to reposition or repurpose Amazon's term of artificial intelligence, right? Corporations, in a sense, are a kind of exosomatization. They are the locus of a kind of intelligence located within an organization. And we've had to adapt our societies and our legal structures around these kinds of artificial intelligences, if we stretch the term a little bit. So in some senses, the AI as it is has been very much part of our societies for a long time. And maybe that's one way of thinking about these kinds of changes, right? Maybe, I mean, in the last panel, the last talker rather, gave an incredible survey of the field of video surveillance and showing some of the kind of problematics, which I'm sure were very apparent in terms of ethics and so on and so forth, and of course the politics of technology. And maybe we need to sort of not diminish the specificity and the uniqueness of this turn towards the cognitive in software and algorithms and so on and so forth, but look at the legal structures and the regulatory structures that we had to previously create to protect society against artificial intelligence.
But you see a qualitative difference.
So, of course, there is a qualitative difference. I suppose there's a penetration of the life of the individual in a very radical way. It's unregulated to a quite worrying degree, and I am rather suspicious of the turn to ethics as a response to it. And there are real problems with that.
Okay.
So, of course, I mean, the question of the qualitative, the question of the automation, the question of the lack of an ethical centre is perhaps new. But I think there are continuities as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you talked about law as a possible field for an application of artificial intelligence systems. How far do you see the practical application of all these?
Well, I mentioned the implications in my talk as well, and I think, all these AI systems, especially for the law, they can have two sides. One is the positive impact. We can have these tools and use them for the social good, or let's say, to do good things in general. Access to justice, make access to justice cheaper. But also it can go the other way around, and they can be used in a way that society doesn't want. For example, you don't want to press a button and have someone prosecuted and send him to jail or her to jail. So I think, I usually use this example to my students as well. It's like manufacturing knives. You can use them to spread butter. You can use them to harm other people. Depends on how you use them, and I totally agree with a professor here that we need regulation, of course.
Mm-hmm. Professor Seyfert, what do you think about the knife analogy?
Thanks. I'm not a professor, but thank you.
At least an assistant professor, that helps.
I will do what academics tend to do. I will not answer the question. I have a little problem with the term artificial intelligence. I mean, you in your presentation pointed at it. It's a very contested term. People keep pushing the definition, what it means to have an artificial intelligence. And in fact, if you talk to practitioners, if I talk to algorithmic traders, they have a very different and specific understanding what an algorithm is, which varies differently to philosophers and social scientists. And in fact, there is even a regulatory scheme to define what algorithms is. The German High-Frequency Trading Act is a very interesting case. They construct the notion of an algorithm or the algorithmic logic in a completely novel, different way. And the story here is they did not have access to the algorithms of the traders for secrecy, but they also understood that they couldn't actually understand and process it. simply because it's too complicated. And this regulation is really interesting because they started to redefine the definition of an algorithm simply as a relational object, by its effect, the effect that it has on the markets, right? So the regulator says, instead of like you telling me what the algorithm is as a black box and how it's structured, I will just say whatever it does, what your system does to the financial market is what we define as an algorithm, and then you can deal with the consequences, which is a very interesting, innovative way of just redefining from a regulatory perspective what intelligence or what the algorithm, machine learning algorithm is. It's a completely relational model that redefines it, and of course it has performative effects insofar as these companies have to now deal with the regulation and adapt their systems to the regulation. Mm-hmm. So it's very different if you talk to traders, to regulators, to scientists, philosophers, or we also heard today scientists talking about artificial intelligence, about how they write the codes. But in practice, it's actually a very relational model. Even trading algorithms cannot really explain by their codes, because they're in constant interaction with each other and redefine their activity and their behavior. So they're behavioral, relational entities, right? So that's, for me, very important to point out that this term artificial intelligence, especially if it's designed as some sort of like genetic code that we can decipher and learn, is very problematic in an empirical sense.
I would try to get away from this semantic discussions. What does it mean, artificial intelligence or algorithm? Because somebody started with Turing, and already Turing said it doesn't make sense to speak if intelligent machine is or not. Coming back to your algorithm, the point of the heart of an algorithm is a decision procedure. It helps you to improve your decisions. And we have to go back to the very famous Königsberg example to understand what is an algorithm. The problem is when you have a river, on one side you have the city, on the other side you have the soccer field, and you have only two bridges. And let's say you have 10,000 inhabitants from this town. And you want nature that 50% go on the bridge north and the other 50% bridge south. What do you do that each person of the 10,000 people makes the right decision? This is an algorithmic problem. And now the answer is precisely, you can have many ideas, and people had many ideas, but to solve the problem is easy by mathematics. You give them a coin and say flip it up and down. If you have a number, you go south. If you have no number, you go north. And then precisely 50% makes the right choice. This is the idea. We have a procedure, a decision-making procedure, which is based digitally on numbers, and it helps you to make the right decision. This is the idea. Naturally, when it becomes to enormous amount of data, we have to get very highly complex mathematics. So the mistake is not made by the mathematics. The mistake is made by the pressure of time of the people who handle the mistakes. So algorithmic trading is not a mathematical problem. It's a problem of processing not fast enough. And people make mistakes.
Okay. So if we look which kind of metaphors we collect here, we have the genetic code, we have knives. It seems that we are looking for, with tools, okay, it seems that we are looking for words, for concepts to get a grasp on what artificial intelligence or digitalization is and what it does to get that somewhat clearer. In the back of these questions is often the idea that we, in a way, lose control. If we accept decisions of black box systems, we do not really understand how they get to these decisions. What's going on there? Are we losing control we had before, or are we stepping into regions where we had to decide ourselves before, which are now possible to treat with algorithmic systems? Often one talks about the end of theory. So the idea is when one has a pattern recognition system, then there is no causation which it detects, but only correlation. Do you think that's true? I think we heard talks today which explained that we need a lot of knowledge, engineering knowledge, to make learning systems work. So it seems not really true that there is no theory in there. Some opinion to this, please?
I don't know what you mean with the term theory, right? When you train an
causality,
AI,
let's say.
Causality, right?
Okay.
In the algorithm that I described in my talk, we didn't look for causality. The system just learned correlations and tries to find patterns, regularities in the data, and this is what it does. Even if it was we define it as a white box algorithm, but even if we were using a black box algorithm like a neural network, or black box could be the same system with millions of features that it's very hard to interpret, right? Again, this system would learn correlations in the data. Of course, there is a huge bunch of work in machine learning that looks in causality, and when we use this kind of models in reality, and when we touch very sensitive topics, causality is the way to go and look.
So I think it's important that we recognize that the claims to the end of theory is an ideological claim, right? It's in no sense a scientific claim. It's a claim that's laden with politics, and it's laden with the political economy, and I think it's very important that we put that front and center. And it's also a claim that's located historically, and it's located geographically as well, right? It's a claim that comes out of Silicon Valley. It's an ideology of Silicon Valley, and it's an ideology for an industry that seeks, as Mark Andreessen says, for software to eat the world, right? Quite literally. And in my talk, I referred to this kind of ideology as a cult of dataism, and I think it is indeed a cultish way of thinking, and it's essentially a kind of a form of fetishism, right? It's what we might call an algorithmic fetishism. And
what's a fetish? The theory or the idea that
the idea that algorithms can essentially have the agency, and that humans lose that agency, right? So that in an important sense, what you have there is a way of justifying certain kinds of political economic structures, certain kinds of changes in law, and so on and so forth. And, we see this, for example, in the way in which, in a very interesting way, we had that wonderful talk about car automation. And car automation flips very quickly, often in discussions, particularly in the popular press, around the trolley problem. We saw the trolley problem immediately becomes front and center, which is, of course, an abstract philosophical question, right? Out of context, and gives a kind of a purity to the issues involved. But it's not just a philosophical question. There are huge social and political consequences of these kinds of technologies. I can only point very quickly, but you might think of, for example, the claim that, is it 50% of jobs will be lost by 2025 or whatever. There is a certain kind of ideology of data that has massive social and political consequences, and we must historicize those claims and place them within their context.
So you mentioned the concept of agency. So maybe algorithms, or surely algorithms, are not the kind of entities to have agency, but it's also the question if people are ready to give them or to accept a kind of agency by IMDs, by systems rating humans. How do we deal with this? I mentioned this phenomenon of machine bias, that people are ready to accept decisions by automated decision-making systems, and that they rate them very reliable and probably more reliable than similar judgments made by people. How do we deal with this? And maybe has art something to contribute to how we deal with this?
Coming back to your first question about theory, when you read the original papers by McCarthy, by Shannon and Minsky, they stay very clearly that machine learning or machine intelligence, first of all, is a mathematical theory, but at the same time it's also a physical implementation. This is the word, a physical implementation of a theory. Therefore you have then a machine, but the machine is only the physical output of a theory. That means we have more theories than ever, and the product of theory brings us better machines. And coming back to your question, why we can believe in machines, because there's a famous essay by John von Neumann about the reliability on machines, and he says even when the input, he gave a fantastic convincing model, even when the input of the information is completely wrong, he can build a machine so the output is right. So this is far beyond what happens to us. When we have an input into the human being, you cannot expect that the wrong input has the right output. This is very rare. Most of the time we have the right input and the wrong output concerning living organisms like human beings. But so we can build our machines, even when the information we got in is wrong. So you can say the reliability of machines is much higher. What means the cognitive aspect than the human organism. This is said to here, but it's proven.
Okay. You want to react to that?
Which question do you want me to answer?
I thought I thought you
Maybe believe machine.
The machine bias?
I thought you wanted to answer to that. No.
Okay. I can answer.
If
just
you like,
quickly
please
to the
do.
theory. I think I would just agree with Professor Berry that I don't think there's any such thing as no theory. I think there's just unreflected bad theory if you're not being careful, and that's what we see in many of these instances. And when it comes to machine bias, I would come back to the argument that these algorithms are relational entities. So the algorithm not itself is racism, but it is racist because it is learned or socialized in a racist environment. And you talked about this. So if you bring them up in a white environment and they have never seen non-white people, then they will be probably as racist as people would be who grow up in white neighborhoods. So that's, I think, very important. What I tried to point at, I tried to make with the relationality, that it of course learns from the interaction with the environment, and exposing it to certain kind of environments will make it act in a certain way.
For example, what he said about the law system. No? In the law system, you see very precisely why we need algorithms and why we need artificial intelligence. Because when you read what happens in the law system, it is so dysfunctional, you cannot even imagine. When a building in Cologne is collapsing, this famous bibliothèque, it takes 9 years before the process starts. If you want an example of dysfunctionality, this is besides the law system. When you have economical trade wars, and you have, then people have to read thousands, 10,000 of pages. People claim to do it, but they don't do it. So what you need, but the companies who do it have algorithms who go through certain key concepts, certain key dates, and because of these key dates and these key concepts, they make a picture, a model, what has happened. But still, it takes years before we have a result. So if we would have this machine or this artificial intelligence, also we would have no result at all. So what we need now is even more algorithms and more artificial intelligence, that our systems are functional. No? I always say, why does the German railways come late? Why do German airplanes come late? Because the people who handle it don't know the business and don't know how to handle algorithms. That's all. They have completely incompetent employees, and therefore we have to suffer all the time.
Okay, any protest?
I think I might take some issue because, there is a question of values, really, isn't there? There's a question of value systems or perhaps a notion of worlds. Because I'm thinking here about, what is the value system that drives the legal system? And it's, of course, justice. What is the value system that drives, capitalism, its profit, and so on and so forth? The drive of presently existing computational systems tends towards efficiency, speed, and so on and so forth, right? And we have to ask questions about whether those values can be translated so easily into different spheres, as it were. And I'm thinking here about the fact that, for example, it's very easy to stand back and say, and not that Peter was doing this, but you might look at the political system and say the political system's dysfunctional, therefore we need to make it move faster, we need e-voting and all sorts of computational techniques. But actually, in some of these value systems, we've learned through historical learning, as it were, through processes of of cultural development, if you like, that certain spheres need to go slowly. They don't need to go faster, they need to go more slowly. Here I'm thinking, for example, about democracy. Democracy is more valuable the more slowly it moves. Efficiency isn't necessarily, or speed certainly isn't necessarily a good outcome for that kind of sphere. And I wonder whether law too is one sphere where we might need to think about that. Of course, that raises the other question about whether artificial intelligences, in this specific instance, or algorithms, can represent or mediate other kinds of value systems. I think that's a very interesting theoretical question, and I think it's a wider question in terms of the kind of practices of the computing industry and computer science and so on and so forth. Can they be reoriented to take these things into account? So it's not a case of making the most efficient system within the contours of regulation. That's not what I mean. I mean, can values such as justice be more embedded in algorithms?
Mm-hmm. What about flexibility? It's always difficult to compare humans and machines and say there are some topics machines will be never able to achieve. But maybe it's flexibility. So we saw this tweet, this famous one by Elon Musk, who said that maybe they were overdoing it with digitalization at Tesla. Could it be that we lose flexibility when we go too deep into pattern recognition systems and so on?
I'm not, to be honest, too worried because I'm also not too. I don't believe too much the ideology of those who produce the algorithms and sell it. We tend to overestimate the cybernetic ideology of complete feasibility, so that what scientists or producers of algorithmic systems tell us what their systems do, we actually tend to believe that that actually is what's going on. And most of the time, that's actually not what's going on. It's a very messy hybrid practice, and it's as messy as human interactions. There's no such thing as a computational logic or a homogeneous logic. It's very different
algorithms, the different formats, they interact with each other in a very messy way. So I'm not really worried ending up in some sort of like cyber dictatorship being ruled by an algorithmic logic. Simply because if I look at what actually is going on, I don't think it's actually much homogeneous, much more worrying than what we see as sociologists in interactions with human beings. Of course, it operates with a certain kind of like digital logic, but it's extremely messy. If you talk to practitioners, they're constantly worrying to, pardon my French, things fucking up, right? They're extremely worried that things are going awry and that things collapsing, and it's really hard for them. For instance, on a high-frequency trader has to like update the whole format of his data set every week. So he gets like emails from the stock market exchange. They tell them your whole data set needs to implement a new format, new parameters. If they forget to do that, the whole trading actually collapses. So it's a very fragile, unstable system. And we tend to, I think, overestimate the stability and the power it imposes on us. I think it's actually not as, threatening or homogeneous as people tend to think.
Okay. There's no direct way. Okay.
I would say what you cited, Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking. This is really poison, what these two people are saying. Stupid and poisonous. Because we have to ask, why does society suddenly have this summer of AI? We have this summer because society is in a condition that needs expert systems. Because the old expert systems like politics, what we had, our democracy, and our economy, everything is close to collapsing. We have everywhere crisis of democracy. It's called post-democracy. It's called defective democracy. It's called simulated democracy, etc., etc. So we cannot close our eyes and to say everything is fine. So we see we can't solve anymore the problems. And what I said when in my introduction, the question was in the beginning: can we build machines or mathematical systems which are superior to us? And the answer is precisely yes. It's complete nonsense what these people say. They have never made one serious look in the writings, Because since 50 years we can prove that we make progress. And the answer is this question: yes, we can make systems, machines, interfaces which are superior to us.
Okay.
And we need them. We need them that billions of people can survive on this planet.
Okay, that's a completely different perspective from what we see debated in the media. So we need more artificial intelligence because we need it for all the problems to be solved.
We are complete poison what they're saying.
Yeah.
This is a problem.
So maybe we can take some minutes for some questions from the audience. Some short questions you can address to everyone here or to a certain person. Are there questions? Okay.
During today's session, ethical issues about AI applications have not been discussed in details. Therefore, I should like to ask Professor Barry about his opinion to the following issues. How should societies, I mean all of us, act today about the development of autonomous weapon systems like drones or other military equipment?
Okay, it's a big question.
That's a very specific question. I mean, if you're using it as a case study, I mean, autonomous weapon systems are terrifying. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And these systems are already deployed. They're deployed allegedly on the Korean border, which is obviously very timely in relation to what's going on in terms of their politics at the moment. But the idea of code that kills, algorithm that kills, raises gigantic ethical conundrums. And these are, I think, they don't require a professor to stand on a stage and declare that these are terrible things. I think it's not so much a question of ethics, it's a question of politics. These kinds of systems have to be democratically debated in societies, and societies have to understand and come to a decision about them, right? And one would hope, maybe I'm coming over a bit Habermasian, but one would hope that in that kind of public arena, the public sphere, that societies can, maturely consider the implications of some of these systems, because of course these systems are also part of and the future for the economies of some of these nations, right? So there's a really interesting conundrum. What are we building? So, for example, the surveillance systems, right? Some of these surveillance systems are built, say, in Germany or England and so on and so forth, under certain kinds of regulatory structures. And of course, everyone thinks, of course, that's very, very good that these things are done. And then they're sold to totalitarian regimes or authoritarian regimes, where, of course, all those privacy protections are immediately turned off, right? So, I think this is a debate for society. And, of course, there are analogies with weapons of war more generally, and there's a whole set of ways of setting up these kind of questions. But I think it's timely that those questions are returned for public debate.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we should also see another point on this, that human mankind has created a very complex world with a lot of problems, and there's Ashby's law and the law of cybernetics, that if you have a complex problem system, you need a complex or counter-complex solution system, and maybe artificial intelligence can be one tool for human mankind to face all these issues that have been created, because they are already so complex that just with the genuine power of ourselves, it's impossible to create new tools to face these things that we have created, whether it's the climate crisis or other issues that are really complex. And so I see a positive power in it, and we always should think about it with what we need is really transparency, because we have reached a status with the Internet of Things and the interconnectivity through the Internet, that we really bringing down power and enabling those who use the power for their own benefits, rather than the society can benefit from this interconnectivity through the Internet, that we not lose these transparency and advantages through new black boxes that enables us that we don't understand what's going on, and giving back the power just to a few people that control these algorithms. And I think it should be a very open discussion how we can control and understand these systems and to see the positive impact rather than always being afraid of things. Of course, we had this security issues before, but I think, as Peter Weber said, we should face it with a positive impact, that it's not always makes us afraid of being controlled, but seeing the necessity that these tools might enable us and machines to face what's happening in the future and make it possible to survive.
Okay. I think it's less a question than a statement. Does anyone want to react to that?
I think what is telling us is something I could agree. You see, we are used to have co-creatures like animals, which are co-creatures living with us on this planet, given to us by nature evolution. Now we are starting a new era with new co-creatures, which we create ourselves, intelligent agents. And as we know, people for thousands of years have been able to have not only a functional relationship to objects, they have also an emotional relationship to objects. They have emotional relationships to objects and animals. Why not expect that we will also have emotional and functional relations to artificial intelligence and agents? And this will happen. And we need this new kind of co-creatures because we have so many dysfunctional systems in our life that we cannot trust anymore on animals to help us. We have to trust intelligent agents. This is the point.
You're so optimistic about. Yeah, it's really great. You're so optimistic about artificial intelligence. So maybe one more question. Is there one more question? Maybe. No. Okay. It's the last one, and then we can.
I think it's a really valid point that AI can take stuff that we don't like doing and just do it better or more efficient, but it can, at least I hope it will not be able to have emotions for us. Because we as human beings are driven by emotions. So as far as it doesn't take that away from me, I'm actually pretty fine with all the advances we do. Or am I missing something?
Yes, of course.
So one way to think about this is to look at the position of labour, position of workers. Amazon is a wonderful case study. Also very timely. Now the second largest company on earth. It invests heavily in artificial intelligence. It invests heavily in distribution, logistics, and all this kind of stuff. And look at the subject that's being constructed as a worker within, for example, the Amazon warehouse, right? Workers can't smile. They're not supposed to have emotions. They are robots. They don't even have to think about where to put their hands because the artificial intelligences use lasers to indicate where the movement of their body is supposed to go, right? So you say it would be terrible if they take emotions away from us. They are doing that very much so, but it tends to be behind walls. So we absolutely need a critical investigation of how software and artificial intelligences create intensifications of proletarianization. Right? These things are happening. And I in no way am a Luddite, although the Luddites obviously get a bad press, and they were trying to do some very valuable things in their critiques. But one has to be very careful about thinking critically about these kinds of issues. So,
you also want to react?
Yeah, my answer will go in a little different direction. I think what I was trying to show in my presentation is also that the emotional affective aspect has always been there in the transformation of using technical devices. Of course, if you have a strictly Marxist approach, then these will be necessarily just fetishes, right? The object will be a fetish, it's a market fetish. And this is obviously true to a certain extent, what we just heard. It's being like actively exploited. All the literature on effective labor shows how, it's being using certain kind of like social media to, being followed by more people, and all these techniques are set up in a way to give you emotional or affective satisfaction, right? So this is being played with. On the other hand, I think there's also like beyond that pure Marxist perspective, an a very positive engagement, effective engagement with things and objects that the new materialism talked about. And I even would think that the whole immersive aspect with technology only works precisely because of it in a certain attraction on an emotional level. And it's not just cognitive, right? This is very effective, and I don't think it's necessarily bad, but of course it's also important to point out that there are people literally working on effective labor, dragging people on their emotional, structure and trying to exploit them. That's definitely true too.
Okay. So there are a lot of big topics raised. I think transparency is a very important one. Confusion is a big one. It seems that practitioners are talking about artificial intelligence in a very different way from, I don't know, I don't want to say journalists because it's me, but it seems that the public debate is in a way not realistic enough, and the question could be, how can we deal with this problem? We, meaning journalists and scientists, and of course artists, as this is a house for art, we have to, in a way, get used to this new technology and get used to it in a realistic way. So we have to find out where it really can help us and where it really confuses us and where it uses our biologically evolved standards to make it difficult for us to see in a realistic way what is going on there. So as a last statement, I think we do not only use critique and warnings, we also use little utopias, not the big utopias which tend to become totalistic if there's someone saying, I know how it has to be for everyone, but maybe little private or little scientific utopias where would you like to see an artificial intelligence application? Where would you wish to have one? Where would you hope to get one in the near future? So, do you like to start?
Could have done with a little bit of time to think about that. You sprung that on me. So, I don't really have a dream of an artificial intelligence that would solve a particular problem for me. I think that's kind of the wrong question to ask, actually. I think, we talk about the problems in society, we talk about the way in which artificial intelligence can deal and help us to get through some of the crises that are very apparent in our societies more generally. But actually, maybe the question of which artificial intelligence is as a utopian solution is the wrong question to ask. And we should be asking about questions of, for example, poverty, right? Inequality. And maybe those are the issues that actually require us to deal with. Because, as I referred to earlier, one of the big problems, and in fact why artificial intelligence is currently being invested in such gigantic quantities of money are poured into it, is because it solves some of the problems of labour. i.e., you can fire workers, right? You can fire people. You're a journalist. As you know, the Silicon Valley revolution has not been kind to journalists, right? It has eviscerated newsrooms. It has removed the capacity for really important investigative journalism and replaced it with algorithmic feeds generating texts and, of course, fake news. And these are important things to bear in mind in
Okay, so your point is focus on the problems, not so much on the applications you might dream upon.
I don't want to be nudged into answering that question directly.
Okay.
Well, I know a couple of researchers, AI researchers, let's say, that they work in these problems in the University of Sheffield and elsewhere, of course. So I think there is a positive aspect for sure. I don't have an application to mention per se, but I think there is positive impact. I mean, I just arrived in Germany. I don't speak German. I could translate straight away on my mobile. I got recommendations for restaurants. I understand that this might be biased or this might be driven by marketing and profit purposes, but I got results, right? I knew where to go. I arrived at my hotel and I said, okay, I might go to this area, and this is this is actually a result of technology. So I think definitely there is positive things there, and in the future it will be better, I think.
Okay. Your turn.
Yeah, I can just reiterate. I mean, the saddest part is probably that we spend so much brain power just about like placing the right advertisement on the right point of the screen. I mean, that's pretty sad. So, of course, you know, fighting poverty or, you know, getting something that would help people is actually goes without saying. But I think also from a sociological perspective, I would also wish that we also start reflecting on what it means to be subjects and human beings. Because I think in this discussion that we also saw there's a very interesting notion of artificial intelligence or algorithms that somehow must be controlled, that must be transparent. And I think it would be really helpful to understand that maybe both human interactions and algorithmic interaction are very vague and opaque things. And that we should probably let go of the dream of commanding and controlling it completely. Mm-hmm. I mean, it would be nice to avoid some of the obvious mistakes, but I think in order to understand it, it would help us to understand that they actually don't work much different than human beings. They generalize, they do things that we don't like. They misunderstand each other and so on and so forth. So I think a little relativization of what they do and how they function would probably help both the understanding of how algorithms and artificial intelligence work as much as it would also help us understanding our own life. Because my fear is that the expectations we have, complete transparency and understanding of artificial intelligence is also imposing on us an expectation to do the same with human beings, right? Okay. We basically remodel or re-understand the human beings as a mirror image of the algorithms that we think we somehow can completely control.
Okay, so more transparency for artificial systems and less transparency for humans.
Or maybe less expectations.
Yes. Okay. So you already made your positive visions very clear, but I would like to push you more in direction of art. What has art to contribute to making ourselves more comfortable with this new technology, with overcoming all these overridden expectations and all these misunderstandings and all this panic?
We have to go back 500 years when a painter called Leonardo da Vinci, he said, painting is a science. But now in modern art, we have painters who just distribute pigments of color on the floor. And say, this is painting. This is a very big reduction in the regression. So maybe this is painting, but nobody can say, when I distribute pigments of blue color on the floor, this is a science. So what can help us? So what I expect from artificial intelligence, that's the production level of the artist is raised. And this is not really the problem of the artist, it's a problem of the environment he's living. So today, the artist is living, it's a so-called art system, it's a so-called art market. This is a very unintelligent ambience. And what we can expect from artificial intelligence is that the people who inhabit this art system learn something, because their own natural human intelligence is not enough to grasp the information.
They will be better able to help us understand what's around us.
And then support artists which were more intelligent themselves. Normally it is like this. So when I'm a professor and I have my students, I always say to them, when the collector comes, when the critic comes, play drunk, because when he realizes that you can speak intelligent, he would not think that you're an artist. So, but when you're when you're drunk, like Francis Bacon, or you're a little bit crazy, and you stumble you can articulate precisely, then the people say, this is a true artist.
Okay, so maybe we should say, oh, sorry, I'm only an algorithm or only a robot. Don't ask me. Okay, I think our discussion has not one take-home message, but I think it pointed out in how many aspects there are a lot of questions we have. The society has to deal with. That society has to find a point how to deal with this new technology. So to make it support humans, and not only to make society always more efficient and more transparent and more easy to control. Yeah, if we manage to raise some questions which are worth debating for you in the evening, during dinner, or during the next day of the conference, I think then that's a success. So thanks a lot for listening. Thanks a lot for sitting here and answering questions. And yes, thank you. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.